You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right, you're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him. Hello there, I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise, or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim is that he's good.
I'm saying that we can't know, because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I
know.
said a.
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God, the question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, and then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a problem
Let's
with...
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
Hey, how's it going?
How
Nice to meet you.
doing? Nice to meet you, too.
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do
rejecting
you believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point in...
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I
claim.
didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I
It's-
said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't
Right.
say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay, you can.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg, nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving, I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you? Yes? No? Or that
know
there are
that
multiple
people-
competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles?
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could
I
imagine
infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right and wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
Is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that
as,
way.
as I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the Mona
I'm
Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever, so some.
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
All right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous
In what way?
because again,
I asked you if you
hey,
believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and then
in the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you
But
hypothetically disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking.
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I did. Well, I made,
I
that,
made a
I
specific
characterized
point
it,
that God
right.
was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
nice
I appreciate
to meet
the
you too.
conversation.
Yeah. It's very brave of you to do this.
Thank you.
Surrounded is now a podcast, available wherever you listen. Search Surrounded, plug in, and stay part of the conversation. Anywhere, anytime.
My next claim is that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian. I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, an older individual was found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want four graves.
They want 4 graves. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
So it precedes science.
that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated
doesn't
by
need to derive
pointing
from the
to.
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact that
hang on a sec.
we are social animals, and we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that
my
works.
point.
Science explains it. So
No, science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
But we see it though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be.
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future, or not,
Not
predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody, and so
Hunting
actually,
animals. Look,
no. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but
let's
they can
pause here.
perceive the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank you, man.
Good man. Yeah.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How you
How
doing?
you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little shaky because I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value-predicated act. And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume
Yeah.
about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery's wrong, I think
Now,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't
Well,
that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the
Yeah.
presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
And so
say that-
slavery itself became immoral, and
Yeah.
that was established by Protestant Christians in the
Yes.
UK, who then convinced the
Yes.
UK government for 200 years to go to war on
And
slavery.
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the
'Cause-
flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
What do you
of
mean
morality.
by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well,
yeah.
based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they
and-
did do it based on culture and history, but
Yes.
culture and history have their foundations too. So
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
everyone,
Bible. based on the Bible. They
that's
looked at
much
it
less
and they
true.
justified it in the United States, in the Deep South. They justified slavery
Yeah, but
based
the
on
main
the Bible.
thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently
Yes,
against slavery,
which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans
Humans.
drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
evolving
There's a
morality
specific-
based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay,
So
fine.
with
I think
women's
that did
suffrage as
happen.
well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement,
Uh-huh.
which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
Fine, but what's your
Yes.
point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time, and I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, "This is moral because God says so." Just like women's suffrage,
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
all human societies were slave owning, so you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
if humanity decided,
Oh wait, address that first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
Based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation of the Bible,
It was the Protestant Christians.
which
in-
evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
All right. Well, it was great talking
Yeah,
with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you too.
Yes.
Dr. Peterson?
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like to engage in this discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not like to engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are activated and it ultimately comes about ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting, because I would say by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a
Okay.
definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's
Okay.
a good way of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand? So here's the deal.
At
we
minimum,
can get
it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
We
that?
can, okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth
mean
without
avoiding-
God,
you mean avoid
avoiding it,
infinite,
if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't, you circumvented my initial definition because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise.
And when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist. It really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God, there
It's
is
more specific than that.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
It depends on how you define your benefit. If you
If it's,
define your benefit,
if it's going to come at your expense, would you still
Define
follow
your
it?
expense.
If God came down and said, here is my moral code and you should follow it, but even if you follow it, you are still going to end up in hell, are you going to follow it?
well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ. right? Because they
okay,
were
but-
required.
but
Hang on, I'm answering
asking-
your
I'm
question.
asking-
They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with
Yeah.
the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
No,
when you,
not well.
yes,
let's
they
define.
did. Yes,
hang
they
on,
did.
hang on.
If-
Let's
if-
define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
So
what do you mean by you?
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something that's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then between a definition and a justification? I mean, it's ultimately
No, I said-
psychologically the same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can debate.
Okay, well,
right?
so
And
here's my
I
position.
said that God, among other things.
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position. Now, with that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you
And
come
what
to that
I ought
conclusion?
to do, ultimately, it comes down to what not just benefits me, but what benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my
I
definition
reject
of
that.
morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists in a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality. It's a systems-based reality.
Is there a
and
hierarchical
that is what
structure?
the quantum
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
are. Some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
What
let's
is
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone's
Yeah,
life?
and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying
I
to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have done
asking?
everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that
would
situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you eat
don't
today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because
I
you don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask
It's
you.
just a
did you-
basic
yeah, yeah.
hypothetical
Like,
where you
like if you-
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about
you're-
truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So
Right.
you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you like lied in that scenario. So
Not
clearly that's
without
not what
the
you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to
I
die for it. You
said-
were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How is
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
Yeah. My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you could call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose. At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right. But at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are
a definition, yeah.
Yeah. So at the bottom is God, and
Yeah.
there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid and being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
it depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying...
So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game. Right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily.
Right.
So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony, right?
Yeah, that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking, because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right,
Okay,
so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent, because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you
I
mean
mean
independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay, I completely agree. So in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
Or it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence...
Oh, right, okay. It is God.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they
I
just...
know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that like acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would be something like you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
They're
so is that person
addressing
Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say, I am Christian? Like, I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well, I hesitate to do that personally, because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see...
Why in boxes?
Like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Well, yes,
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to my
you
definition.
understand-
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can
Catholic.
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition, but your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
how
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him. Hi there.
Hi, nice
What's
to meet
your
you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
The
those
higher
things.
it is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's
prioritizing.
partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife.
I love
okay.
her. So I
Right.
prioritize and I
Okay.
sacrifice for her.
Right, right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love in your marriage?
I mean, I am married to my wife because I love her. That's
Yeah.
also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right,
Okay.
so even the small things, I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end.
Of
That's
course.
the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying
It's
worship is almost a
shades.
spectrum, right? Or it's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of
quantum.
like, that's a good
So
question.
when
It's
is
like
when is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
the closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How
worship.
close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I
apparently.
worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love?
I
See,
do.
I'm trying to define something. What
Right.
do you mean worship? I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you
So do you
presumably
have
worship
that
God.
attitude towards your wife?
I have that
Do you
attitude.
privilege her compared to other women?
Of course, I privilege her compared to
Okay.
other women, but I don't worship her. Nor
Well-
does she worship. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over any other human, but I don't think that she is some
You're making the
supernatural
assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're either going in many directions,
Okay.
or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you'd worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship, right? I prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said that the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the closer
How close?
you get...
Can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
Do you know the difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is
I mean,
it? So it's just an opinion that
plenty of-
Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine.
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on
Well,
opinions.
just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true. I agree with that.
Okay, well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald better than Ernest Hemingway? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Why do you think that?
Because of what a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine
Okay,
does.
good. Well,
So it's about purpose and definitions.
Yeah, sure. Let me give you an analog then.
Okay.
The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice. And maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
it depends on what
Twilight
you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and I
If
want to
you
know.
want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top. And insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And if I
There's
worship
no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then
Okay. You just said everybody worships something. I think you've just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship, and hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because you just said they can't be.
The mere fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened, because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or
Of course
devoted
there are.
believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does happen, but it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So The book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan,
Yes.
yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No, his wife tells him to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good. My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories. Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's
I'm
your
Ian.
name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
How do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So,
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics, that's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with that
Well, I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through
Thank
the
you.
example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God
Do you
saying,
think that
go
there's
and
ever
do this
such a thing-
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm gonna wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Look.
The genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress
So
what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm
Okay.
addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great and all like the
think
great
it's a
making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So
Okay, so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a sec.
change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No,
presumably
no. You don't get to skate over
because
that.
this is a
With
straw man.
that's totally
It's
fine.
a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In what
the
way?
argument
no,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a sec.
find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say
I
any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation you're
rephrase.
a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that, because I must
Sure.
have missed it. I
So-
tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay,
presumably what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our
we can only, yeah, well, we can only
Presumably
see
a
through our
perfect
own
being-
lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a sec. Wait, let's
well,
not go
wait,
to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't
incoherent.
God? Well,
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you, but
Yeah,
have
and
it your
1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool.
I don't-
So then the
I
free will
don't-
of the Odyssey fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you want to
tried
respond
to
to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with
Okay.
his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
It just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if
under
you want
your
to
view,
have it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're
Do you
discussing.
acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone
So-
like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm
Good, good.
surrounded by atheists.
My question to you, let me scoot in, would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian
Yeah, but it'll
morality
come
is.
in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different like disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. Eh? I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Like, wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention. Right, and the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, like a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system, and I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
That's a good start,
right.
Because I would say that actually constitutes belief. Like you said, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay,
Yeah.
he regards that inspiration as God.
Okay.
Right, and when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists
Correct.
not understanding
But have
what
you
they're
taken
rejecting.
inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say, and then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
Right.
I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate in Christianity.
So if I'm
right?
living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else?
Well,
that you
one
brought
of
up?
one
Pause
of
there. You've been voted out by
that
the
was
majority.
good. That was good. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello there. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with the idea of the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture, and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality. But if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well,
your
I
opinions.
can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's true.
sectarian belief than something that's central to Christianity. Now, there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that, but that doesn't have anything to do with me. You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment. Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about
question?
you know that you put yourself there?
Do you think, is sin like a part of Christian morality?
What do you mean exactly? Sin as
Like
a part?
the
It's missing
concept
the
of sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target, right? And so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target, and that you can miss it in many ways. And the consequence of that will be your life will be ridden with anxiety. Your life will be pointless.
And what
People
if
will
I,
turn
like,
against you.
don't believe in sin at all?
Well, do you believe in error?
I
Have you made
don't-
any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the
Well,
idea
that's a Christian belief.
of the idea of hell, I don't believe
No, that's
in
also
it
a
because
Christian belief, by the way.
a Christian belief is hell?
No, that there's no sin that, well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But there's a Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't believe in that? Like I think
Well, okay, let me
that
a-
when you,
okay,
can I
that's
explain
good.
a little bit?
Sure, sure.
Okay, thank you. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised by. And so there are certain things that lead you down a dangerous path. And once you are dead, I think you're kind of removed of that person. There's no like, there are no factors of the earth that have to.
What happens after death.
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you've suffered terribly in ways that you thought would never end, do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say
Okay.
that there was a part that I played
well,
in
that's-
that.
okay,
but I
that's
also
the thing
do
to
think
find
that,
out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe in somewhat of free will, that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors. And so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences of that.
Like I said, I can't
Yeah.
address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done in the past that weren't good?
I think that you can.
Okay, then
Yeah.
that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian
Well,
doctrine?
believe
if you would go to hell for
okay,
those things?
You believe you can improve,
Yeah.
right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that. Yeah, those are all Christian presuppositions.
I guess maybe we have different opinions of what Christian morality is.
Yes, sounds
so
like
I think
it.
that my opinion of Christian morality is something that I don't really agree with, and maybe you would define that as like the foundations
Well,
of Christianity.
let me give you an example. So if you want to atone, which means to unify yourself and unify that with the world, then the first thing you have to do is figure out what you did wrong and admit it. That's a confession. That was good.
Thank you. So
Yeah.
nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
Hey, well, hello again.
Hi there.
My claim is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible, I don't see, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it exists all throughout time, culturally. And the way that you define meta-truth, I don't see a distinction between that and like a metaphor, right? But and you also say that you cannot say whether this story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know whether they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
So that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say? By their fruits you'll know them.
Okay.
Right. Well, so one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing. Right. And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the case. And I've also talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me, and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's many different pieces of evidence that all converge on something like the practical and conceptual utility of my approach. Now, is it the same? There is a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right, be the most plausible. Because in regards
it's an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can add value to someone's life. Interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote-unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt, and that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result in an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality, right? So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming to people voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of a classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that. Like
protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about how these interpretations of the Bible, if they kind of resonate with us. And I think that can in some case be some kind of evidence, this might be true, but I think we need to ask, is this evidence damning, right? Is this evidence certain, right? Yeah. So, but I do want to look at, again, the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at, again, the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah, so I believe this is a meta-truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all true and dandy, and I'm sure that is in some way, the story was put in here for the reason, right? To tell us about, fights between brothers. But also, you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological, historical sense, as a historical fact. Were there two people that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but I'm not sure why it matters to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says, and the things
many ways.
Right. But if we interpret
sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes fact,
but for
sometimes
example,
metaphor.
The reason why it's important, right, very important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins.
True.
So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot make, we cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, even as just events, because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happened, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to our fate. Do you see what I'm saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that? So you pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well,
think that's...
There's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling. I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of a society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking. You know,
Exactly.
it's the case that forever when people have been interpreting religious stories, they wrestled with exactly the question that you just described.
Mm-hmm.
When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time-bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be the deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for eternity or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why
I don't concern myself so much with that particular question. You know, like that would be something that would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint. And I'm not putting that down, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking me a question I really can't answer.
Okay.
I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled with your framework and pushed it kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, you see, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. Okay. You know, well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it. Not really. It doesn't provide you with a foundation for navigation. But knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is like an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that,
why is the burden on Christianity?
Because it posits, right, that this interpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty, right, that can
what evidence would you accept?
That would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack and then again kind of get to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Let's pause there. I'm sorry, that's time.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the rest.
Well, I definitely picked the right person.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you
really,
so much.
Very good. I don't like talking to win, but there were portions of all the conversations that were truly productive, and that it's instructive for people to see the distinction between a debate that's aimed at local victory and dominance, let's say, even of ideas, and a discussion that's predicated on mutual exploration and establishment of like a harmonious understanding and peace.
Jordan Peterson, out of all of the kind of theists that are on the internet, he is one of the better ones in regards to just like being genuine as a person. But I do feel like he does a lot of, I guess, wordplay that can make it a little bit difficult and kind of just muddies the waters in regard to what we define as Christianity and atheism.
Jordan Peterson, I credit to turning me into an atheist. I had a blast talking to him today. I think if the average person followed what Jordan Peterson said, they'd realize that fundamentally Jordan Peterson is not a Christian, in fact, uses many atheistic principles, and operated under bad faith by seeming to forget what basic words meant when he didn't want to answer a question.
His definitions can kind of shift a little bit depending on the moment, and I think that he wasn't afraid to flex that definitional muscle.
And I felt really good about our conversation. I thought that it highlighted some key issues in Jordan Peterson's theology. I hope he reflects on these issues and maybe deepens his perspective on them in the future.
With Zena, she was able to build up such a rapport that he chose her in the end, and they were able to have an extended dialogue, which is something I had hoped for. So maybe I learned a little something from Zena about being more cordial.
It's extraordinarily useful to be able to model productive debate and conversation for people and see how my thoughts were landing with people who are particularly skeptical, and to put that in front of a large audience and to assess the consequences.